we prosper as spiritual beings, and I believe we are truly spiritual beings having a human experience, and we prosper and thrive from each other's energy. You know, our energy, our human field is brighter than the sun. We're making that happen, right? We've lost touch with these things, but I mean, this is sort of who we are. We need to find that again. But a good way to begin to transition out of this societal sludge that we move in is to again reconvene with each other, but not just every other Tuesday. You have to do it all the time. You have to get back to living in community. We should be forcing ourselves back into that. Stop isolating, because it's so comfortable for us to stay in our own little family unit, or if we're alone, by ourselves in our room, watching the tube or whatever. We just, we have to, that's the hook. And we have to recognize that this is a hook, and it's a heavy one, and choose a different response in terms of what we typically do to get around it.
All right, and welcome to another podcast of Paradigms Lost and Found. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Frank Natoli. Frank, how are you doing today?
I'm great, JM. How are you?
Good, good. And I am John Michael Dumais, for those of you who might not know. And yeah, we're, Frank, we are into, I don't know what you could call it, crazy land, exactly.
Some people might call it clown world.
Exactly. A lot of stuff we've been talking about over the course of time. I know it's been a while since we checked in this way, but we've been conversing in other ways. So what are you noticing these days that about the system and where it's going, and what's kind of on your radar?
Well, gosh, paradigms lost, paradigms found. I mean, we could kind of change that to narratives lost, narratives found, right?
Yes, we could.
They're shifting daily, and it's just fascinating to watch. So maybe a good place to start would be kind of unpacking what is going on with this COVID narrative, right? I mean, we're seeing these massive shifts, and at the same time, so many contradictory policies. And I'm curious to pick your brain in terms of what do you make of that? So, I mean, for example, I think some of the obvious ones, right? We see the UK and now Ireland. I think the Czech Republic. There's been others too. I don't want to leave any out, but let's just, those are the ones that just popped in my mind. Rescinding all of their COVID restrictions, wiping them out, the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle, as they say, the passports, the masking, the whole thing. And at the same time, you see a doubling down in countries like Austria.
Yeah.
It's really hard to, now if you're an Austrian in Austria, and I think it's pretty safe to say, and people might quibble about this, but I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of people do not support these austere mandates. They may support vaccination as a general rule. They may support, they may, believe, there may be majorities in certain places that believe the urgency of vaccines and all this. Most people are not necessarily in support of forcing individuals into these things. So if you're in Austria, what goes through your head? You're seeing your neighbors, it's all relaxing. And now they're telling you, I think in Austria, it's all adults now. It's the first country, I believe, to have done this. All adults are now going to be required to get a vaccine just to essentially function in society. What do you think of these contradictory policies? Is there a reason to this madness? Is there some kind of rhyme here that we're trying to figure out? What do you think is going on?
I mean, it's speculative, but I think that we're seeing the wheels of the bus come off, basically, the wheels of the COVID narrative bus, and it's not clear exactly why, but I think the timing is interesting that in the last 3 or so weeks, Joe Rogan has had Peter McCullough and Dr. Malone on, and we're talking about like 90 million views, some insane. I mean, compared to like CNN, which it's lucky if it gets 300,000 views. I don't even know what they're doing, but the counter narrative has ascended, and it's clear that the promises, and they've had to admit it. CDC is admitting that the transmission, if you're vaccinated, you're still going to transmit. They're admitting that the tests really don't do what the tests do. They're cutting down the quarantine periods from 10 to 5 days. There's so much of what they had claimed. Absolutely. I mean, they're talking about focused protection now, which was the Great Barrington Declaration that they poo-pooed and went out of their way to poo-poo. And of course, now we through Freedom of Information Act stuff and Veritas Project and other revelations, it's just shown that they've been trying to get gain of function stuff going. They can't really deny it anymore. So I think some of it is CYA. It's like they can see that the populace is not going along with it. You saw it happen in Kazakhstan. Now that I'm sure it has a lot more to do with has to do with other things as well, but it's an example of the populace. I mean, they overthrew the government there. Regardless of the reason, they were like, we're not dealing with this anymore. Thank you very much. Goodbye. We're going to firebomb your cars. Now, I don't advocate violence, but it's an instructive thing, especially if you look at the European countries. I mean, over the course, they have longer histories than we have in the States. Over the course of the last, 800 years, 400 years, 300 years. I mean, just the amount of moving of territorial lines on the map, and colonialism and recolonialism, and Kazakhstan itself is coming on, but the people's memories are still there. It just seems like I mean, maybe it's controlled. Maybe they're like cover their ass and make sure that we don't come after them. But the promise of the vaccines, the promise of lockdowns, the promise of masks have all been shown to be, emperor has no clothes. So, cover your ass is maybe a more literal interpretation. They do seem to be targeting Fauci, who, let's face it, he's done plenty on his own account to be targeted, but he seems to be the fall guy now, because I think that DOD doc is pretty much was the deep state's way of saying, yeah, we need a sacrificial lamb here. And he deserves it. He deserves to be gone. But him just resigning, if that ever happens, and people have suspected that that's going to happen soon, isn't going to, answer the problem. But it may, I think, if all these requirements go away, you can imagine that the populace will ease up a bit, and maybe there won't be as much furor for them to try to stand down. Now, you see them building a wall around the White House, and they're doing that in Canada too. What is that about, Frank? I mean, what do you make of that?
I don't know. I've asked that question. I think a lot of people are asking that question. What is this about? What are they anticipating? I think we can get into that, because I'm not so optimistic on the next turn of events. So I think it's anybody who's watching this, I think take caution that things are certainly not over because they're relaxing, the COVID narrative. I think it would be utterly foolish to just assume that We've won, they've lost, they're backing off, and that's the end of it. There's much more going on here. And I think to the extent that we're seeing such contradictory messaging, I mean, the UK is a great example. I mean, they went from being nuts to all of a sudden just throwing it all out. I mean, in one session. It's a very odd thing, right? I mean, it's sort of like, well, why did you do it to begin with? And if you look at the data, and not that I'm someone who took the data wholesale as if it was some kind of sacrosanct information. I mean, it's a lot of manipulation. But if you just look at the data, it's inexplicable. Why now? Why are you doing this now? Why would you before? You had less cases, less outcome, but less negative outcome a year ago. And now it doesn't make any sense. If the idea was it's supposed to make sense. And I think I'm a little further down the rabbit hole than you are in some aspects, right? I don't think the information and the interviews like Rogan and McCullough and Malone, I think we're meant to see this. I think this is part of the overall picture. It's such a wide viewership. The information is disseminated so far and widely. I find it difficult to believe that the power class, the establishment, isn't somehow allowing us to get this information. Part of it speaks to the policy or the tactic of divisiveness. Sure. And I really do think that this sort of throttling up and down and up and down, and if you look at authors that discuss totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt, for example, this is part of the process. This sort of demoralization and confusion in the populace is sort of part of how they approach it. It's this hand on the dial, and you're really seeing that now play out sort of. Kind of right before our eyes on a daily basis. It's either say one thing, one country's doing one thing. I think getting back to your question about the wall, what's going on here? In my opinion, we are about to see our standard of living diminish in ways in which I don't think most people could ever conceive of. We're just so accustomed to getting what we want when we want it. And the things that we want, if you think about all the widgets and stuff that we buy, and we buy relatively reasonable prices, and we have a just-in-time distribution system. And I think all of that is in jeopardy. Charles Hugh Smith writes a lot about this subject, this idea, and I think it's just something that doesn't get a lot of attention. I mean, maybe in the alternative channels, people talk about the supply chain issues, but even there, I find most of them are really kind of just scratching the surface. They're not really digging a little deeper in terms of the kind of longer term effect that we're us Americans and really the West at large are all going to kind of realize. I mean, it's going to get more and more expensive to extract the resources we need. It's getting more and more expensive to transport them. I think that we do have serious problems with respect to access to fossil fuels and to the kinds of things that are supporting essentially everything that we're consuming. And I don't think people realize it's not just gas in your car, it's everything. The package, you know what I mean? It's ubiquitous in all things that we consume. What happens when that's just simply not available? I mean, we are simply going to have to do without those things. I'll throw a question back to you because I think it's an interesting one. I just read a recent Charles Hugh Smith piece. I don't think the most recent one, maybe one or two essays ago, where he talks about he's anticipating that the Fed won't save the system this time. He's anticipating that they're going to let this bubble crash. I mean, it's basically a major deflationary kind of crash. Maybe that has something to do with the walls that they're building, right? In other words, something kind of more, what's the word I'm looking for? Acute, it's just going to happen. I mean, as opposed to sort of peeling the Band-Aid off slowly, because ultimately, I think they're going to inflate or try to inflate their way out of the problem. But that could be a response to a major sort of deflationary event. That could come, in a black swan type of package, like a banking collapse or something. I mean, there's so many things floating around out there if you're paying attention to, the economy, to the financial sector, the Chinese real estate debacle. I mean, there's so many, we'll call it contagions, making their way around the globe. It could be almost anything. And I have to think that if they do allow that to happen, then the response is what's really going to do us in, right? The response would be to simply just, try to inflate. And I think inflation, it's a tax on us, of course. It could get wildly out of control. But if you're a central planner, the good thing about inflation, I think, is that nobody's going to know what you're doing. They're not going to understand where the problem comes from. If they crash it, I think most people will kind of recognize where the locus of the issue is. They'll kind of know more or less where to direct their angst. If you, with inflation, I think the average person, most people won't really know who to blame. It's going to be very confusing because the pension check still comes, right? But it doesn't buy you anything. You still get Social Security, but it's not good. It doesn't do, it's pittance now because everything is, 10 times what it was. And I think that creates a lot of confusion amongst people. And I think that creates a distance between the people essentially causing the problem and, the people that are really feeling the brunt of it.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of, the 2008 crash. And, I think it was directly the response or the non-response or the quality of the response from the de facto governments, bailing out the banks. And you remember, the investment houses and the banksters and investment houses still insisting that they get their bonus checks. And, then we wonder why Brexit happened, and we wonder why Trump got elected. Well, it's a direct response. There was a populist backlash. Everyone, really looking, even from afar, even not even looking that close, could see what was going on. And there was a collective disgust wave, I think, that ushered in these populist waves. It would have been Bernie, I think, had they not been submarined by the left, by the Democratic National Committee. And so we got Trump, and he was another populist. And I'm not here to argue his benefits or deficits, but I'm here to say that people see, and whereas I think maybe people were less informed before. I think the last 2 years has turned a lot of people into researchers, into readers of alternative press, and readers of people like Charles Hugh Smith, who talks a lot about the massive disconnect between the financial economy and Wall Street, and this kind of his latest thing about this cult of speculation of just run it higher, and the kind of this is what I always thought about from the very first time I saw and sort of semi-understood what Wall Street was, and I was looking at kind of what the trends were, and I'm like, this is all mental. It's all like what people think. I mean, and back in the, if you took the long view, my father was like a long view, blue chip type investor, and so he would hold on to stocks for a long time, and the ups and downs didn't affect him that much. But for people in it, like day traders and then speculators, it's so much of it is run by belief and fear and greed, and it's going up and it's not going to go down, and therefore we got to jump in, and it's so disconnected. While Main Street and loses, all these businesses closed over the last 2 years, and we have a 3.1% unemployment rate. Really? How about all the people who stopped looking for work? It's really closer to 20%. Long-term unemployment. They've stopped looking for work. They can't get unemployment anymore. Maybe they've turned 62 and can collect something, which is probably not sufficient, but at least maybe a little bit to help them get by. So yeah, I think whatever happens, I think people are seeing. I'm not sure the controllers are going to be able to get away with it, but it does seem there was I think an article I shared with you yesterday about the Fed's coming out with their plan, their publication on the central bank digital currency, CBDCs, which is, we've talked about this, and I think what I would say kind of why maybe things are happening is because maybe they've decided that they don't need the pandemic, that they can just crash the economy and introduce CBDCs. And that will be really, that's where they wanted to go in the first place. They wanted to be able to, control people's income and have this massive, metaverse, this high level of people being surveyed, people being data mined, where everyone's a commodity kind of thing, and where you don't really own yourself. And if we have a universal basic income, which I'm not against the idea, but if it's run by the central banks and they're the ones who can tell you, what you can buy, what you can't buy, and if you get rid of all the mom and pop stores, what are you left with? You're left with Amazon and other places, and your choices get very, very limited. So, going back to your point about different quality of life and not being able to get things from overseas, and this is again another thing that is talked about by Charles Hugh Smith and others, is that we have a very precarious supply chain, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Like what makes it precarious, and why is that different from, say, the supply chain we had 25 or 50 years ago, or even more recently, perhaps. But yeah, things are, they'll crash things, deflate, massive deflation, everything is worth pennies of what it was before, and then they just buy it up again, like they did after 2008, buying up all those empty houses, turn around and try to sell them, not that they always can do that, but it seems like that's, the hollowing out of all these businesses. And that's Amazon's business model to begin with. They see a product they like that's selling well, they'll haul you out. They'll find someone else to create it for them, maybe somebody in China, and they'll directly compete with you until you go out of business. That's their model. You can read up about it. It's quite clear that that's what they do. So I don't know. Does that seem like too speculative, or does that seem like more on point?
That was the business model of Rockefeller, right? That was the Standard Oil model. That's exactly what he would do. He'd roll into town. Yep. He was bankrolled. He'd open up a competing station, yep. Sell his gas for a lot lower than the local guy, and put him out of business. And then when he's out of business, he would jack the prices way up, and you were stuck with Standard Oil. So this is the business model of champions.
Yeah, I don't know if people are aware that it was that same model that got rid of public transportation in a wider way that it was going to be developed. And also, I suspect, though I don't know directly, that the early versions of the electric car, which were run off in the 1900s, they had electric cars back in 1911, I think, 1908 maybe. Literally, that could have been something. And of course, we have to, and of course, Nikola Tesla with his, he had energy directly from the atmosphere that he was developing, and God knows exactly how that could have been implemented. But they once Rockefeller, or was it Carnegie, who was funding him, found out, I think it might have been Carnegie, found out about what he was planning, there at his various experimental stations. They said, that's it for you. No, we're not going there. We need a reality in which we can meter everything, in which we can get a nice monthly check. Do you notice that almost every business now, the business model is a subscription model? They want a piece of your monthly reality. They want a piece of your hide every single month for their business. And I understand that model, but really, is that where we are now? With planned obsolescence and things that just don't work, and it's the whole system has to come down. The farmer system, the finance system, the government system is not providing very much relief, as we know. I don't know. I'm not celebrating that fact. I don't love that fact, but you can't keep doing it this poorly and have no accountability. And there hasn't been accountability. Frank, are we going to have an accountability moment? There's a question for you.
Well, geez, so you'll own nothing, you'll have no privacy, but you will be happy, JF. They're telling
I'm feeling happier
right?
already.
The subscription model, I think they're doing that. Don't they do this for Tesla? If you own a Tesla, to get all the services, right? You have a subscription. I believe the bundle's $199 a month for the bundle.
Well, it's either that or
So-
$10,000 for the full self-driving computer. So 199
Okay.
a month versus 10,000. I think, yeah. Yeah, I
Right.
think they think they're going to get a lot more people to bone up the 199 than the 10 grand.
So you never actually own the car. If you have to keep paying that forever and always, it's sort of like a property tax,
That's true.
John Deere just launched their new driverless tractor. I believe it's an $800,000 purchase price. And I think that they too now are discussing to implement a subscription-based model, I guess, so that is, to your point, we have to be very, very aware. I mean, you brought up a lot of things in your last segment. We're steeping in manipulation. This is true everywhere. I would go back to even the beginning of your talking points. And I know that you and I might differ on this issue. Again, I might be a little further down the rabbit hole, so I'll bring the listeners down with me. Was Donald Trump really organic populism, or was Donald Trump the front running of it, right? And I believe he's a front runner. In other words, he's understanding where the populist mindset is. They're going to try to control that as best as they can. They're not going to leave it to chance, right? You had Bernie Sanders on the left, bringing people in. Ron Paul was here too, if you recall. I mean, he could have walked away with this whole thing back in, 2012. I mean, all he had to do was declare himself an independent, and he would have won. I mean, if it was a fair and free election, he would have absolutely won people over, right?
That's another rabbit hole. Yes.
Well, indeed, right. Well, let's come on. I mean, I think it's safe to say that elections everywhere can be manipulated. Some are just done in a more conspicuous way than others for political expediency. If they want the public to flare up about the issue, they'll do it. And if you think about it, look at how that was maximized by the establishment in our 2020 election, right? It launched the whole January 6th thing. Now, gosh, wasn't that, taken advantage of? And I'll remind everybody, if there was no such thing as the thing, there wouldn't be a word such as agent provocateur. I mean, there's a word for it. It's real. Yes. I mean, they do this. They manipulate, they use their clout and their power and the FBI or whatever. You see this with the governor of Michigan and that whole debacle of the kidnapping. And it turns out it was like, I mean, 12 FBI agents and some mildly retarded man, I mean,
right. If
I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean.
No, I mean, I think you're not far off. Yeah. No,
right. But so it's important that people, I think, understand and where they're getting their information from. We're so severely manipulated on so many levels, on such a regular basis, that it's difficult for us to sometimes I think, orient ourselves around what's happening. And I make this point often. I think there's a purposeful intention to get us to that place because we become then less prepared, right? So I think if this is very, very macro, but the central planners set the fires. Then we go and we exercise all of our energy and effort putting out these fires and not really contemplating and preparing for what's coming, not really looking deeply at what they've been doing. They're sort of skipping town with all our money and we're, pulling our children out of the river that they threw into. I mean, that's sort of how they operate. Right. And it's important that I think people begin to, you and I, of course, talk about this all the time and rise up and our community is trying to think a little bit ahead. I think New Hampshire at large is kind of leading the way in a lot of ways, legislatively in terms of sort of forward thinking types of, positions as opposed to just purely reactionary. And I think that's how we have to kind of orient our minds, right? We have to keep trying to look a little ahead because damn it, they sure are, right? The people who are trying to consolidate all the power, which is essentially what has been happening now for the last, 150 years, right? There's sort of a banking cabal that's constantly, manipulating and buying political clout, and this merger of the corporate and the political, and this public-private partnership, as the World Economic Forum loves to keep reminding us. That's
That's
fascism. I
fascism.
mean,
Yeah, exactly. That's the definition.
that's
Yeah,
the exactly by
yeah,
definition it
yeah.
epitomizes the fascist state. And I often make this point. People need to start asking questions. God damn it, ask questions. What? Well, I understand they have a lot of money, but who gave them any power over us to do anything? Why do they get to launch their vision of the world? No one's asking me what my vision of the world is. I have no say in how I would want to see things. Why does this small group of people at Davos, why do they get to tell us what the vision of the world will be? Does anybody not ask that question? I guess not, right? I mean, Bill Gates gets to tell us all about public health and immunology, and he hasn't even graduated college. I have 7 years of post-high school education, and if I tried to get away with preaching about epidemiology or virology or whatever, I'd be shouted down as somebody who should know my place.
Well, it's part of the paradigm lost or paradigm dissolving is this whole authoritarian thing, which people, which is greatly based on power and money, and people with power and money. Bill Gates, a great example. Obviously, people probably listening to this know that he's purchased many a media organization or a chair or a program. The environment chair or the medical chair.
Right.
For whether it's a newspaper, NPR, wherever it is, he's given. I think the last time I looked, 350 million at least, which is nothing really to him, but it's enough that, if a broad enough range of organizations, kind of, going back to was it Rockefeller back in the odds again, the early 1900s, when he decided that, oh, wow, we can control the medical system, right? And oil was started to be used for the development of some of the pharmaceuticals. And he ended up buying, what was it? The editors of about 25 papers across the country. And all of a sudden, all of these medical paradigms, medical models that had been in use for a long time, whether it was indigenous medicine, herbalism, chiropractic, sun therapies and natural water therapies that, still have validity today, homeopathy, energy medicine, various types of things, a lot of things that were in use. They just basically turned them into quacks. They said, those are quacks, quack medicine. We're going to control all of the medical schools. We're going to do all the textbooks. And then, of course, you can see what the outcome of that is. We're living now in this bizarre authoritarian clown world, as you called it, where, people who've been brought up through it believe what they're saying a priori, or if they raise their head above the fray to say, oh, wait a minute, they get fired, their license gets removed, they get brought up in front of the council. Is it Dr. Merrill Nass from our neighboring state in Maine, who did some of the original great work on the disclosure around the anthrax vaccine, has been called before the board of medicine there, and they want to have her head examined, literally. They said that she needs to undergo some kind of therapeutic review to see if because she's passing along this misinformation, and she's, by the way, Dr. Malone's doctor, and she's the one who came out with some of the information that I learned early on about the whole suppression of hydroxychloroquine. She was on it, and in fact, her work actually helped stop some of those trials that were using trials, right? That were using fatal doses of hydroxychloroquine to prove that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. I mean, the amount of mendacity and homicidal craziness that went on and that continues to go on and remdesivir and so forth. So, this going back to this idea that how do we in the future, as the paradigm of authority and kind of this, authority, especially by virtue of money, how does that come down, and how do we then as a collective move forward with some form of collective sense making, which was what we're doing now. I mean, you and I are talking, Rise Up talking, lots of groups all around the state, country, world. But we're not in agreement about everything that's going on. But I kind of feel like, we are starting to accumulate a picture of what is, and also a picture of what ought, right? So what's actually going on? We don't agree, you and I don't agree on all the details, and that's fine, but we can see what's not working, right? And we can see, but and going back to your question of, why should it be them? Well, I don't have a lot of power, you say, and it's true, individually we don't, but so the question is, how do we come together and assert, ideally in a nonviolent way, our capacity to stand up against this thing, and maybe it's part of what we've talked about also and been working on, is creating a parallel system. Buckminster Fuller said, don't bother trying to change the system. They're not going to change. Why would they? Why would they change? But if you can create something parallel that's better, now that does take thinking. It does take resources. How's that going to come about? There have been relocalization efforts since at least the mid 2000s. I was involved in some of them. Transition town movement, people might be familiar with that. But people understood, going back to your earlier point about the supply chain, that we can't have this precarious supply chain and rely on very far away sources for energy or food or other necessities. What are we going to do? And I think people are probably willing to have some loss in maybe I think people realize they don't need every latest iPhone and every tech wizardry, and that there's some beauty and value in being able to come back in community again. I mean, we just had a game night the other night here in Keene, with our Rise Up community, and no one was selling anything. No, it was just community coming together and realizing, didn't cost anybody to be there. It was just community. It was like simple. Hey, playing games again. We can come together and work on things. But the question is, can we do this in time and at sufficient scale to ward off this prospect of a crash and burn of the economy, and therefore of our quality of life? And that's the real question. And what can we do? So what can we do, Frank? I'm all ears.
Well, boy, I'd be a popular guy if I could really answer that question with any kind of efficacy. We're doing it. So, here's where I get optimistic. A couple things. So obviously there's a lot to kind of parse out here. One thing is that the establishment class can't actually accomplish what they want to accomplish until they can sell us on the ideas. Now, you might see their successes are kind of conspicuous because the media amplifies them, right? So the people, for example, that got roped into this whole COVID narrative, the people that really just sort of bought into this, they're the amplified voice. They're sort of an amplified minority. You've got I think a pretty wide swath of the populace who go along to get along, kind of. And in private, they might say, oh, this is kind of stupid, or, I got to put the mask on until I sit down and then I take it off. I don't really believe this shit, but I'm going to go to the restaurant anyway because I like their pizza. And, that kind of mentality. And so it just sort of continues, and everybody just assumes, we're all just complying, without any thought. But they have to win us over on the general premise, on the ideas, and they're doing a terrible job of doing that. And you're seeing more and more people, and this is where I get optimistic, respond in ways they might not necessarily are at the depth that we are in terms of our thinking about the issues, but they're beginning to respond. You're familiar with the Great Resignation, this idea of all these people kind of pulling out of the economy, pulling out of the or we would say maybe moving into a different sort of underground type economy and not staying in the system, so to speak. That's how you win. That's how you transition. That's what would, I think, the the planners, the managerial class fears the most, because they can't control you and they don't have those levers of power over you. I mean, for most of history, the few have controlled the many by currency. They control the money. If you can control the money, you really can control everything. You can control the people. And if you think about it, that's what's happening now at large. It's the money. The CARES Act money is controlling what the school systems are doing. It's controlling what the airlines are doing, right? Everybody knows if they're getting fed from phony fiat confetti money from the Fed, and they need that, then they're going to do what's required of them, right? And airlines are business. I'm just using this as an example. A business is not going to chase customers away because a 2-year-old won't wear a mask and you're going to kick a whole family, off of an airplane. What kind of business would do that? They're doing the government's bidding. That's the epitome of your fascist kind of state. But it's the money. It's the money that makes this go round. That's the lubricant, right? And it's all phony. I mean, for people who haven't caught on, I mean, the grand scam is you keystroke, conjure, print a bunch of phony money, then you take said phony money and you buy the real stuff with it. Now you own all the real things, right? You own all the real property and the real equipment and the real factories and all of this. So that makes you in charge. You didn't come by it honestly. You counterfeited, essentially you counterfeited the money to buy it. If you and I tried that, we'd go directly to jail for a long time. When they do, was it Bob Dylan said, you steal a little, they put you in jail, you steal a lot, they make you king, right? I mean, that's essentially what's happening. And that's the part of their system that's winding down on its own. You and I don't actually need to do anything for that to work itself out. That's kind of happening in real time. It's not a shock to anybody. They knew this would come years and years and years ago. And of course, their measures have always been to just prolong, just keep kicking it, right? Just a little further. And in 2008, we talked about this, it's kind of when the system really did die, and they just kind of plugged it into, epinephrine and respirators and all sorts of things, just keep that corpse alive for as long as they can keep it. Well, guess what? It's rotting now, clearly, and we're kind of circling the drain in this economy. This is their mad rush to get to the next thing, right? The grand reset, and they have their private-public partnership, community to try to put it all together and make it work. The governments are going to work with the corporations, and they're going to reset it all in their interest so that they control all the resources. And us idiots don't have to worry about owning anything or, the responsibilities of it, just leave it all to them. And that's where they ultimately want. But they have to sell us on the idea of it. We have to be convinced that that's what's best for us. They can't actually do it with this level of the populace, the level that is resisting it. That's the problem they have. Every day that passes and every turn or pass that they take in these inexplicable, confusing, totalitarian type measures, they eat away at the patina of legitimacy for the establishment class. At each turn, more and more people are turning away, turning it off. Right, you see this with the declination of the media viewership. CNN is hemorrhaging viewers. They dropped something like, 90% in their key demographic. I mean, this is horrific. I mean, I don't even know how they're still in business. But this is all a good thing. And this is why we need to be super vigilant and really, really judicial in what we consume, because these guys know that we're not tuning into CNN, CNBC, and CNN. So what are they going to do? I mean, they're going to infiltrate the media that we're going to, right? They're going to manipulate that. They're going to, so we have to be very careful And I get concerned that a lot of people get invested in personalities that have become very popular in the alternative. And I'm concerned that they may let us down on purpose at some point and really further demoralize the public. I get very worried about that. You know what I mean, right? Because I don't want people feeling, emotionally crushed because something, it didn't work out. And now they invested heavily in this particular campaign or this particular movement, and they feel so, you know what I mean? And that's kind of the way these planners have been manipulating us, right? And the demoralization is critical to ushering in an uber totalitarian and uber controlled surveillance type state, which is obviously what they want. Now, the drive to do that is in itself going to propel the drive in the other direction. Take away cash, increase demand for alternatives, right? That's the natural flow. Now, you and I have the good fortune of being in the good state of New Hampshire, and there's a lot of people in New Hampshire that are all already, considering all of this. I mean, there's, groups that barter, gold and silver, cryptos. I mean, I have my thoughts about cryptos. We didn't get into cryptos, but, but alternatives there's going to be in high demand, and it's going to force, that movement in the other direction. And of course, they're going to try to sabotage that and try to but they'll pass laws. But the more that people turn off that broader system, the more that those things become ineffectual. What are laws but just a bunch of scribble on paper? And we've become too convinced as a people, in experts, in high functioning autistics wearing costumes and holding gavels. We can't put our faith and reliance in this. And I think I'm optimistic that people are finally kind of recognizing that. They're recognizing the futility in the system as it was. I don't want to go back to 2019. I know that might shock a lot of people, but the old normal sucked. The old normal led to this. This was the outcome of the old normal, right? Congratulations, you're on the tail end, right? The system eating itself based on your normal for how many years. So as you said, and I agree with you 100%, you can't fix rot. You have to gut it out, and the system's it has to be reinvented. I'm not suggesting that there's no let's say vestiges of the system as it is. That I'm not saying that everything has to go, but I mean, it needs to be overhauled. I mean, the first thing that I think a reasonable manager, I'll use the word manager, not leader, not ruler, but a reasonable manager would rescind all laws on day one. Get rid of all of them, and you start from scratch. This way we start with a clean slate. Now that doesn't mean anybody can go do what they want now. That's not how that works. But you basically wash a clean slate and you start from the beginning and revisit. I mean, there's so many things that could go that I don't think any of us would miss. The tax code. Who really wants that? I mean, but anyway.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of it comes down to how we're going to manage the transition. And it feels to me that the word that kept coming up as you were talking was communities of trust. We need communities of trust. However, we can have those communities, and blockchain is a good example. Again, we haven't really talked about Bitcoin and that sort of thing. We know that it's coming down to 32,000 now, which is about 1/3 of where it was, or half of where it was somewhere.
Oh, but anyway, wow. Has it dropped that much? I haven't checked. Wow,
yeah, I just looked at Zero Hedge today. It's edging towards 32. People were talking that it would go down that far, but the idea of the blockchain, the idea behind the blockchain is it's a trustless system. In other words, it doesn't require trust to operate. So on that level, you can have interactions which are kind of moderated by the community, this kind of distributed ledger, but locally to be able to have communities of trust, people that you get to know and work with, like we've started to do in various communities around New Hampshire, statewide and regionally and locally, people that you can, talk to, learn. There's no substitute, I think, for getting out there in community, talking to people, getting to know them, who's growing food, who's raising chickens for eggs or meat, where, who's your local herbal pharmacist, who can do, who knows about alternative educational systems and opportunities as parents leave schools in droves. And, those are good and those are necessary. And yet we do, and I think we'll see more disruption and more chaos, really more dissolution. But my bigger concern is, the economic system, which comes down to what we value. And as you've so eloquently pointed out, the financialization and the confetti money has devalued, the very notion of value, that a central banker can just print stuff out and then give it around, and those people can buy real assets, or the gazillions of more than $1 trillion, I think, the hospitals have gotten over the last 2 years, in exchange for, now you're going to follow our recommendations now, right? So you're going to not going to let people have ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. You're going to push remdesivir, which we know is deadly and shuts down the kidneys, and at least 22% of people. This is a verified fact based on already existing studies from 2017, I think. And, as you were saying, school systems and school boards now, they took that money, they have to show that they're doing the mandates, right? And of course, hospitals and the hospital system, the healthcare system writ large, I think is 35 or 40% or 35% of our entire GDP. I mean, if you take a look at the entire system, hospitals and clinics and doctors and nurses and research.
Disgusting.
I mean, it's really kind of like Hydra, the Hydra, Hail Hydra. It's like this multi-tentacled thing that, after Obamacare, Obamacare, what happened is that all the private doctors and private little practices went away. They all had to get subsumed, almost all of them. They all had to get subsumed into these larger hospital practices and regional practices. And then all of those doctors lost the capacity to have their own individual point of view and to be able to just practice medicine as they could. And keyword practice here, it's all practice. We're all just practicing. There is no final thing. The scientific method and how doctors have always approached things is, hey, we have this novel virus. Let's try this. Let's try that. Zev Zelenko.
Right.
I think I know about zinc and I know about hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and other things. Let's just try. Let's just see. And many doctors around the world that weren't so handcuffed by their system were able to do that. And we saw returns early on. Back in April of 2020, those doctors were hard at work. And there was a survey of 33,000 doctors that was done right around that time. I think it might have been April or May of 2020. Like, what are you using? Well, the highest numbers said we're using hydroxychloroquine. Later on, it became ivermectin, as that seemed to be even more effective further into the progression of the disease. But nonetheless, you could see how the narrative was killing that. I remember looking on Google, and the first few pages were nothing but bad stuff about hydroxychloroquine. I'm like, but this is a WHO essential medicine. It has 60 years of use. People use it over the counter in African countries as an anti-malarial. It's like the most proven, practically the safest thing you could ever imagine. But the whole narrative had gone the other way, and they had these studies that were killing people, and they were featuring those fake studies, entirely fake studies that were later panned. But did people find out about them, or were they controlled? So we've had a lot of discussion in the last few weeks about mass formation and how people get to be controlled. And it's propaganda. It goes back to Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and how he got women to believe that cigarettes were a measure of their freedom in the culture, the freedom to go their own way. Yeah, you can just cigarettes. And of course, we know the doctors are all on board with the cigarettes. So, nothing has really changed. But now we, in today's world, we have this exponential technology of and algorithmically driven technology of social media that, that is in its drive for clicks and profits. Therefore, it's outrage porn. They're specifically designed to get you to click on that thing that is most likely to confirm your bias, essentially. And that way, people then end up in these silos, not talking to each other. I never could have believed we'd be in this bizarre time, where people literally on the left and the right, primarily that's the division, but there's a lot of people like me and a lot of people I know locally. And I don't know if you were once a Democrat or considered or still consider yourself a progressive. I know you have, you're like a lot of people, I don't want to try to pin anyone down. I don't want to be pinned down. I'm kind of like I feel I was, I did vote for Democrats in the past, but stopped that after a while. And, I voted for, I think, who was it? Who was running against Clinton, that libertarian guy, Ross Perot. Back and because I looked at Clinton, I'm like, I'm not getting it here. Something that just is not clicking here with me. But anyways, but today, this division, and I agree with you on a lot of what we're seeing is just so clearly designed. But one wonders is it, what is it? Who's it serving? I mean, it's serving Facebook and the businesses that that commodify our every move, and those who've studied how Cambridge Analytics and were busy at work in the 2016 election, had, I don't know, what was some huge, like thousands of data points on each person. It's like, when you were pregnant, and probably when you went to the doctors, and how you were likely to vote on this and that issue, and who you're likely to give your money to, and how you're likely to respond to different kinds of ads. And about A/B testing and ads, right? So they'll test the same ad but with a different message. Well, they have ABCDEFG testing, and so they'll get you specifically. And this is why you see the news being differently framed in different countries. And like, wait a minute, is the news that they're getting in France and in UK is on the same exact issue, is framed exactly the opposite as it's being presented in USA Today or the Washington Post or New York Times. So I think one of the things, going back to this idea of needing to have communities of trust, we have to really let go of all of that and come back into community and say, what do we need to do with the people that we know and can reasonably be assured of that are trustworthy? Not to say that those communities can be infiltrated. I'm sure some are, but how can we work together to build that person-to-person trust, which is, if you don't spend time around people in person, I don't mean on Zoom, in person, in their company, working on common things, playing, eating together, having kids around, and doing musical events, and getting to know people. We're not going to get into this place where we can start to develop the alternatives communities that we need. And specifically, how do we, and maybe I'll toss this over to you, how can we, in this transitional time, how might we reconfigure our tokens around value, which is money, but there are many other ways to think about that. So as to be able to trade for or interact for the necessary energy and food, at least at those two levels. And then we can think about having a reality in which not everything that we buy is a throwaway thing, which is the way it is today. It's like everything is purposely planned obsolescence. But I can imagine that in this low in this interrupted supply chain reality, people's washers, people's refrigerators, people's cars, these things that they need, to get by are, I can see a huge, service industry growing up around this. Maybe we're using 3D printers, that can print metallic and other kinds of things, which we know are coming into vogue. Maybe we'll see that, really start to take on. So as people realize, why do we have this throwaway reality? Why are there huge piles of trash that we've been exporting to foreign countries? So Frank, what do you see as possible avenues for starting to approach those bigger issues that aren't just going to be about me and you, trading for eggs, but it's like the larger community needing to be able to have energy and be able to treat its water supply so that we don't end up having huge other outbreaks of diseases, and be able to relocalize food. What do you think is, what are your thinking around bringing some transitional systems into place for that?
One of my most admired people in the world just passed away. His name was Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Buddhist activist and monk. He talked a little bit about, I think they call it Shenpa, this concept of being hooked.
Shenpa. Exactly. Yep.
Right. And so, we need to bring an awareness to when we're hooked. And the way you respond is to choose intentionally a different response. And what we tend to do as humans is we just revert to what we know over and over and over again. And I think it's a process of choosing different responses to bring us out of this trap. One of the things that are hooking us over and over again, and I hate to say it because we're using it now, is this technology. And I'm not a Luddite. I'm not somebody who, who's all technology. I don't necessarily stay away from it. I don't think we have to throw it all out. But there's an awful lot that we could shed ourselves of that's actually restricting human progress and human growth, or really, quite frankly, stunting it. It's regressive. I mean, we're turning into worse people. Such a simple way to say it, right? But as a result of modern convenience. And we need to break away from those bad habits, right? We need to recognize, that we're hooked, right? First, let's just recognize this is, what we're doing is bad. Like our routines, our general routines. When you begin to expand into community, it's important, I think, that people work together to help change our common routines. Let's support each other to do that. So, for example, people who are in more close proximity to each other, for example, as you talked about things like game night or that kind of thing, get back to that, right? There should be an availability in your community to do a game night every night of the week somewhere. Not that you have to do it every night of the week, but you should be able to do that, as opposed to what we do. What do? We toil during our day, and then we sit our asses on a couch and we watch nonsense. Most of it's propaganda, let's be honest. I mean, most of what we're consuming is designed to influence us, and in truth, in negative ways. There's very little that we consume that's positive for us.
Or medicate or distract us, I would add. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. But that's also it's negative because even if it's just sedating us for 6 hours or whatever, there's no positive outcome to that. We've wasted that time being it's like taking a drug and zoning out for whatever. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that there's not a time to do it, but even when you do, it's more enjoyable when you're with people you love and people you care about and having fun. And there's, sort of a collective energy, a positive vibe that you're bringing together doing that. We prosper as spiritual beings, and I believe we are truly spiritual beings having a human experience, and we prosper and thrive from each other's energy. Our energy, our human field is brighter than the sun. We're making that happen, right? We've lost touch with these things, but I mean, this is sort of, who we are. We need to find that again. But a good way to begin to transition out of this societal, sludge that we move in is to again reconvene with each other, but not just, every other Tuesday. You have to do it all the time. You have to get back to living in community. We should be forcing ourselves back into that. Stop isolating, because it's so comfortable for us to stay in our own little family unit, or if we're alone, by ourselves in our room, watching the tube or whatever. We just, we have to, that's the hook. And we have to recognize that this is a hook, and it's a heavy one, and choose a different response in terms of what we typically do to get around it. And that's something that is a process that takes time. It's uncomfortable. It could be awkward. A lot of times, maybe you're around people you don't really know that well. A lot of us are, when we do spend time around people, because we have been so hooked, so to speak, we tend to be spending time around people that are bad for us. Maybe it's family members that, you love your sister, but damn it, you really shouldn't be around her every weekend because she just brings you down. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just throwing that out there, right? But this is what we do. But we keep showing up on Sunday, and we keep, feeding the negativity, and then because it's just comfortable. So that sounds so simplistic, but that's really where we need to kind of begin. And then from there, of course, the more substantive things like building structures that could support us, right? Like you talked about schooling, food, and the kind of things that we need to develop within localities to survive a downturn or a shift in. We talk about the supply chain and availability. I mean, something's off, right? You can go to a Walmart right now, and you look at the shelf. They've got all the junk for Valentine's Day. It's teeming, off the shelf. There's just, and there's like no freaking meat. You can't get chicken. You can't get beef. If I can get all these trinkets and garbage and candy and crap for Valentine's Day, all the plastic shit that I want, I can't get chicken breast. Why? Why are they able to deliver all of this garbage and not protein? I don't have an answer to that question. I'm inclined to say it's got to be by design, right? I mean, there's got to be something there, or it's the phony confetti money going into the hands of producers who are agreeing to not supply, right? Maybe that's what it comes down to, which is again,
well, and we know in the Pacific Northwest, I think it was Oregon, that they shut down the water supply to farms, and so I think there has been. That's not something I've focused a whole lot on in the work that we've been doing, but Ice Age Farmer and others have been looking at, the kind of the purposeful curtailment of the food supply to make things more scarce and to, increase, so one way you can control populations, make them fear for their survival, then they'll go into the binary thinking that's been so in vogue, that mass formation of, do it this way or bad things will happen. Well, we got to do what they say, because they wouldn't tell us a bad thing, would they? Well, anyway, I'd like to kind of, we're just about at an hour here, and I'd like to kind of keep it there. I really like what you said about realizing where we get hooked, and I mean, you said maybe it's simplistic, but I do think it all kind of starts with our own mentality, our own spirituality, how present we are to ourselves and the people around us, and to what's actually going on. I think if we are in touch with that, if we're in touch with our hearts and the pulse of creation that's flowing around us, we'll see what's happening. We'll be able to join with people that we can trust and work towards these solutions. Obviously we don't have the answers, but I think collectively, as we come together, I know we've seen this time after time as we've done various workshops and conferences here, that people in the community know things that I don't know, and know things that you don't know, and you know things that they don't know. And if we just put our minds together and say, hey, what are you seeing? What are you feeling? What do you know? What do you want? What do you need? And I think those are real key questions that can help drive a collective inquiry and community building process that has been by and large dampened down with the rise of the internet culture and social media. We believe we're interacting, but we really aren't. And again, I'm with you. I'm not saying it's all bad, but there is so much of it that's ends up substituting for what we really ought to be doing. And we really need, this is the time. What is essential for each of us, and what can we let go of? And I know that just given the time right now, Mercury and Venus retrograde, that it's a great opportunity to kind of, it's all about values. It's all about initiative, what you're willing to put your energy into and what you think about and feel. It's like, this is a great time to kind of go through and maybe do some winter cleaning and maybe do some deep meditation, get together with close friends who you can trust and start to engage at a deeper level of conversation. Hey, is this working? Is this what we want? What's missing? What are we really here to do? What am I here to do? What is my vision? What is my mission? What is your mission? What is your gift? How can I support you in that? What support do I need from you in that? And it's time that I think we get together and have those conversations, which I think will do a lot to ameliorate the chaos when the systems dissolve further, as they seem very much on the brink of. I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you, Frank. And do you have any final words that you want to offer up?
No, just to follow up on your last comment. I mean, I think even the most enlightened of us have fallen victim to the manipulation on some level, and it's really about recognizing that and moving, from that. That has to happen first. We have to recognize that we've made some bad investments. All of us, not some of us. I mean, pretty much all of us. We're stuck doing things and taking behavioral traits, things that we do on a regular basis with our families, that are just not good for us as individuals, not good for us in the collective, not good for society's future. Those are the kinds of things that we have to recognize, and don't be afraid. Embrace that kind of change. Don't cling to the stuff. It's so, what's the word, ephemeral, like that comes and goes. Most of us actually do get a tremendous positive benefit from things that didn't cost us a dime. And we just have to kind of, I think, go back to that. We probably know that, most of us know that innately, but we're so conditioned now, living life in the modern age and this sort of like hamster wheel sort of lifestyle that, I think we need to just kind of revisit that. It comes first, before anything else, because if we can't shed that, then we're going to be stuck on that wheel.
Yeah, well said. All right, well, we'll let that be the last word, and thanks again for coming out and hanging out, and we'll look forward to the next time.
Absolutely, great talking
to you, Frank.
Jim.
Take care.
Bye.